welcome to the show. Right now, in this episode, we're going to be doing the Beau Brummels. We're going to be ranking their 6 major studio albums, not including the cover album, Beau Brummels 66. And yeah, so kind of a classic 60s San Francisco band, big kind of like folk and country and those kind of genres. What would you say your familiarity with the Beau Brummels was?
Are we saying my initial familiarity or my familiarity now?
Your initial familiarity, let's go with.
Okay, going into this, I knew a solid nothing. I was working on Empty, and yeah, that's about what you're going to expect from a lot of these 60s bands that nobody remembers.
Yeah, and I'd heard all of these but Continuum, so I was operating, but some of them had been a pretty while, so I was operating on having a fair amount of info beforehand. So yeah, you wanna get into it, our rankings?
I just want to point out, we got to do another video later where we're comparing Continuum by them versus Continuum by John Mayer.
I haven't heard Continuum by John Mayer. I'll have to see.
I've heard good things about it, but a lot of people just hate John Mayer, so.
I have no strong opinions on him.
Already at the dead bottom, universal consensus, unless you're including the covers record, because that shit sucks. Continuum. There is just nothing to say about this record. It's, for the most part, a pretty fine batch of songs, but it's the worst kind of reunion record. It's not bad, but it just provides so little intrigue or legacy to this band. Probably the most interesting thing about this is, for whatever reason, they added in they added in a female singer to do the lead, so I'm assuming is like Sal's wife or something, because there's like no info on this record. But why is she here? She doesn't really do anything, and I mean, she has a very nice voice and I do enjoy her, but it's like you have absolutely no lineage with this band. It's like whenever the Cars brought in Todd Rundgren, whenever they did their reunion record. But that at least made sense because I believe Elliott Easton or somebody that was in the band had passed. So it made sense to bring somebody else in. But the drummer did, and I don't think that she was drumming out the record. I don't know. It's an all right record. My favorite songs are Silver Slipper Cafe, Hurry Up, and Do Another Mic. The worst song, without a doubt, is Fantasy. That track is awful. It has a lot of gross electronic elements, which I don't hate electronics, but if you're a 60s pop band releasing a record in 2013, you don't need those. And yeah, that's fine. It's like a 2.5-star record. It probably should be worse than it is.
Yeah, I kind of agree that it's like it's like the most middling kind of reunion album, in that it's not actually like good and like a return to form, but it's also not like bad enough that it gives you something to talk about. Kind of just there, and that will reflect on my score, and I also have it at 2.5. You mentioned the drummer, and it even makes less sense when you know that most of the drum tracks on here were like salvaged from the 60s, so they really had almost no reason to add members. And a lot of I think that's what saves a lot of this album. I think it could be like a really terrible reunion album if it wasn't. Most of the songs on here are like old outtakes from the 60s and songs they wrote back then but never got the chance to record, which kind of saves it from being like a terrible album. So I think it's not something I really want to check out again, but I didn't like hate my listening experience and like want to die while I was hearing it. So yeah, 2.5 out of 5.
For sure. That record's biggest issue is definitely length. It has no right to be an hour long. And like, it's still fine, but why? All of their other records are sub 40 minutes and you're going to come back with that? Just really awkward decision for them. Moving up from here, I don't know where people put this record. I assume it's either here or a slide above. I had the Beau Brummels Volume 2. And after the debut, this is really solid. I like all of these records coming out from here. I kind of feel similarly to them how I did with the Yardbirds. I think that they're a really consistent group and they always make pretty good records, but it's not necessarily my style and it's never really blowing me away in the way it does for others, I would suspect. Regardless of that, there's still some really good songs on here. I Want You, It Doesn't Matter, Can It Be, Sad Little Girl, Woman, and Don't Talk to Strangers. However, like a lot of records that were coming out around this time, I think they has a decent bit of filler and maybe even a couple of duds with That's All Right, I've Never Known, When It Comes to Your Love, and In Good Time, while just kind of being decent. So while there aren't really any truly bad songs, and the songs that I do like here are probably on par with the debut record, the main reason why I leave it below is because I think that this is their most transparent attempt to do something that like the Byrds were doing around this time. It feels very similar to other records by them, and it just gives me a little reason to listen to this over, say, Mr. Tambourine Man or Younger Than Yesterday. Despite that, I still think that's pretty solid overall, and I give it 3.5 stars. It's a good record.
Yeah, it does kind of feel on that album, I would agree that they're kind of following Byrds. You know, their first album, I guess, was released before any of the Bird stuff, but by this point, the Byrds had already kind of come, so you can kind of see they're trying to do that style in places. My number 5, and going up, these are all very strong albums in my opinion. My number 5 is going to be the Self-Titled from the 70s. Yeah, I think it's pretty impressive for a 70s like reunion album of a 60s band. They're not usually this good. It has very good production. It sounds very like clean and open in a nice way. You know, they're kind of continuing that country-ish style with a bit of the folk elements. Kind of sounds like it could be very much a continuation of Triangle or Bradley's Barn, just with kind of an updated production. I think the remake of You Tell Me Why and Wolf are my 2 favorite songs on the album, but I think everything on here is just very solid and it has just great melodies, very clean sound. Yeah, I really enjoy it. I'm going to give this one kind of a tentative 4 out of 5.
Alrighty, cool. It's important to note, you may have picked up on it from some of the things I had said earlier. This is actually our second time going through this. I was recording on a Chromebook the first time and it didn't record to the computer. And just like last time, I have another spicy opinion at my number 4. I am leaving Bradley's Barn. And if I had to assume, this is probably generally considered either their number 1 or number 2, and within good reason. I do think that's pretty solid. But they're really embracing the country on this album. I think that they dabbled in it before, but this is kind of their most sort of gung-ho approach to sort of lean it all in there. And it does work, but it's not my preferred style for the Brummels. And it doesn't work nearly as well as what they were doing on Triangle. When looking at the track listing, there's a few cuts I'm not that crazy about. Night Attraction and The Loneliest Man in Town don't really do a ton for me. They aren't bad songs. I just think that they aren't really the best songs for the Brummels. However, there is an actually like bad song on here for me. I don't like Cherokee Girl much at all. I think it's dramatically overly orchestrated and overproduced. And it takes what could have been a really well-made, sort of more quaint and more easygoing song to something that they're sort of overly building up as to something that just doesn't really merit that. Despite that, there's still some very good songs in my opinion, with Deep Water, Long Walk into Misery, Little Bird, I'm a Sleeper, and the final 3 tracks as well. There's plenty of decent material here that I can't really justify calling it a very good album, but I still give it 3.5 stars. I think that it is a good album, despite what I would consider a little bit of filler.
Well, I don't agree with you about Cherokee Girl at all, but we'll save that for a little bit later. My number 4 from these guys is going to be their debut, introducing the Beau Brummels. And just kind of my track review is that I think side 1's a fair bit stronger than side 2. I think Laugh Laugh and Just a Little are kind of the 2 main singles, they're remembered the most, kind of for good reason. You know, they launched the band and also launched, you know, Sly Stone's career as a producer. So I think those two are just absolute standouts, some of the best in their entire catalog. They just have this great sound and very kind of melancholy, but also catchy at the same time, which is really cool. And there are some other good tracks on here, like Ain't That Lovin' You Baby and Still in Love with You Baby. I think those are pretty good as well. But I think most of side two is pretty forgettable for me. And it's just not like their best, but I still think it's solid. And I think, you know, I think overall it has a lot of the same problems that most bands' first albums have, where they kind of aren't fully formed yet. They feel like trial runs for kind of later releases. I think that's kind of the case here. I'm just going to go with a 4 because their style is very appealing to me. So even though this kind of runs into a lot of those debut album like problems, it's more enjoyable for me as a result of how much I like their style.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I have the same record, but it's at my number 3. And I've said this before, and I'll continue to say it. This sort of channel is really helping me appreciate 60s music more because you make me listen to more of it, and it makes me upset. No, but overall, I thought that this was a really solid debut record. I love the sound of the album. It's very crisp and very clean, which allows Sal to really cut through the mix and a lot of melodies to blend in a little bit more. But the songs underneath are just as good. I'm not as crazy about Laugh Laugh as you are. I think that it's a good song, but it's not one of my personal favorites on the album. Past that though, Still in Love with You Baby, Just a Little, and Just Wait and See are all very good. My favorite track is probably Oh Lonesome Me, which is kind of their first real dabble into country, and I think it works a lot better here because it's still sort of incorporating a lot of that mid-60s pop that they would become more notable for. Stick Like Glue, Long After is also pretty good and has some more really solid cuts like Don't Make You Cry, That's If You Want Me To, as well as I Want More Loving. And the last 2 songs are also very good for me. I was debating between a 3.5 and a 4, but I feel pretty confident just giving it a 3.5 though. It's good, but not really something I'm going to reach for all too often.
Yeah, I think especially on their debut, one of the reasons I like it is it feels kind of ahead of their time. Like it doesn't seem like many other artists had that kind of thing going. You know, the album was released early 65, but kind of recorded and started on even in 1964, which I can't think of really many other things that sounded like that from that time. But my number 3 is going to be Volume 2, their sophomore release. And this, you know, it's kind of similar to the debut in a lot of ways. It has some big singles, has some stuff that kind of would feel like filler, except to me, this band doesn't really do filler that much, because even when I don't really vibe with a song that much, it still feels like they're trying to do a good song. It's not just to pad out the runtime. But on this one, it just kind of feels like a more self-assured version of their debut. They have a little bit more variety. You Tell Me Why is probably my favorite song in their entire catalog. I just absolutely love it. It's got maybe a couple on Triangle could come close, but I think this one's just one of the absolute best. I love the melody. I love the vocals and how melancholy it is. There's some other great ones. I think Sad Little Girl is one of their most kind of epic tracks. It builds in a very satisfying way. Another kind of epic ballad in a sense. Don't Talk to Strangers is kind of classic 60s folk rocky, kind of with the jangle and that and all that stuff. But I think they save it from just being like a Byrds imitator with a pretty original melody that I like. I think In Good Time is a pretty cool closer. I like that Sal goes for a bit more of like kosher delivery, something more like Alan Clark maybe than the typical Brummels sound. That's cool. It's not an amazing song, but I think it's cool enough as a closer and as a different kind of sound. So overall, I'm going 4 out of 5 on this one. It has some of the similar stumbles as their debut, but overall, I think it offers me just personally a little bit more in terms of variety of their sound and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty understandable. For me, I do think that they are sort of latching on to what somebody like the Byrds were doing, but I mean, it's still a good sound, so it's not like it's a bad record or anything. I can see why you would have that higher than the debut. My number two, though, is going to be their self-titled Beau Brummels. And this was kind of a given for me to have it higher because I just love the sounds of the 70s, and this is an incredibly well produced record from that time. Everything is incredibly crisp, and it has this sort of warmth that I don't think that a lot of their 60s records has, just a very comforting and very well put together style. Um, they're continuing sort of what they were doing on Bradley's Barn and Triangle with a little bit of that country pop tinge sound, but I think that it ends up coming together a little bit better here as they've aged a little bit better and the songwriting is able to be more finely tuned. Um, I probably like this version of You Tell Me Why a little bit better. I just prefer Sal's vocals on this record to some of his earlier ones. And that's something incredibly good to point out about this band. I think that Sal has an incredibly unique voice for this era, and it lends a really great charm to them that you aren't going to see from any other bands. First in Line is also very good, as well as Wolf, Down to the Bottom, Gold Rush, and Stay By Today. There are a couple of weaker numbers, namely Tennessee Walker and Lonely Side, but overall they don't really do much to harm the record as a whole. And it's a really good comeback record for a band that had taken a little bit of a hiatus. I'm gonna go 4 stars on it. I think that's very good, and I'm really beating myself up because this isn't on streaming. So I was going to buy a vinyl, but I ultimately decided just to listen on YouTube instead. But the vinyl was like $10. I just should have gone for it.
I wish I had something by these guys on vinyl. I might try to look for like one of their old albums, see if it's kind of like remastered or something.
For sure. Not on vinyl, but I think they have a CD box set that has all of their stuff up to Bradley's Barn as well as some outtakes.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I have on streaming, like on Apple Music, there's a nice like 40 song compilation that's like all of Triangle and Bradley's Barn plus like their singles, which is one of my favorite ways to listen to their catalog. Which
Yes.
leads us nicely into my number two, which is Bradley's Barn. Yeah, I just think this is solid overall. I've always kind of liked country rock, no matter who does favorite albums, by people like the Monkees and the Byrds dabble very heavily in that genre. And here I think the songs are just very solid. I think Ron Elliott writes a lot of really good songs here. I think Turn Around as an opener is very good. It was covered by the Everly Brothers, but I like the original a bit more. And then I totally don't agree with you about Cherokee Girl. That might be my favorite song on the album. It's just so epic for me. Maybe Turn Around's a little bit better, but I just really enjoy it. I think the lyrics are very cool, and yeah, it just has a very epic sound. It kind of reminds me of like Mark Lindsay's Arizona at certain points. But there's a lot of other good stuff here. Like I think Deep Water's another really good track, and so is Jessica. The one song I'm not super fond of is probably the closer, Bless You California. The entire rest of the album is originals, but here they go with like a Randy Newman cover, which it's not a bad song, but I don't know if I need it so much on the album. But other than that, Ron Elliott writes most of the songs. I think he does a great job. Sal Valentino writes some of the others. I think those are good too. And it's worth mentioning that at this point in Bradley's Barn, the band was a duo. It was only Elliott and Valentino. So it's impressive to me that they're able to put together so much material with, session musicians and make it feel like a much bigger project than it really should at this point.
Yeah, for sure. I was really hoping that one was going to grow on me with that repeated listen, but yeah, Cherokee Girl just really wasn't rubbing me the right way this time. I think it's a well-written song. I just don't think that the arrangement really fits the track that well. I was hoping for something a little bit softer, a little bit more within the country vein. But I think that that's one of their most Baroque songs, and I don't think that Baroque is necessarily the best sound for them. I really figured you were going to switch it up on me, but I'm happy that we have now agreed twice here. Number one is definitely Triangle. And this record smokes the first two for me. It's not even close, especially on a re-listen. This thing honestly really took me away. It's an incredibly well done blending of 60s pop with a more traditional folk writing and song structure. And it really does a wonder for the group, in my opinion. It feels far more like imitation, like they finally fully formed into their own sound. And it really just elevates everything here. I love the opener, Are You Happy? Only Dreaming Now and Painting of Women are also very good. And to find all of the tracks afterwards to be incredibly good and consistent. The Wealth of Velvet Fortune and My Old Kentucky Home are as well very good. And this is a record which it's very well made. It's incredibly good for the time period. And I honestly would say, you know what year this one came out? 67, right?
Yeah, 67.
I might go as far as to say this is pretty high up there for my favorite albums of 67. I don't have like the list in front of me, but
High for me too.
Yeah. That was Magical Mystery Tour, right? This year?
Yeah, that was that year.
Okay. I don't know. It's really high up there in the year for me. I want to bump it up to 4.5. I was really close to doing it, but I'm just going to leave it at 4 for now and sort of let it chill time.
Fair enough. And that leads me right into talking about Triangle as well. I don't think there's any competition at the top. I think even though for me, Bradley's Barn is a strong, album, 4.5 for me, I think this is just unambiguously a 5, in my opinion. I don't think there's a single weak song on this album, unlike the first two where they felt like kind of the similar 60s sound that they were doing their own thing, but it suffered from a lot of the same problems that a lot of artists at the time did. This is just totally their own style. Ron Elliott handles pretty much all of the music, and Sal does all the lyrics. And I think both of them do an amazing job. I think it's just really strong. Every song on here I think is really good. The Hollow, The Wolf of Velvet Fortune, The Painter of Women, I think they are just so epic sounding. And I think I like that they do a couple more classic covers of very old kind of folk standards like 9 Pound Hammer and Old Kentucky Home. I think they do both of those very well. It's not just a typical folk cover. They adapt them to their kind of fantastical, more like whimsical style. And I just think they do a very good job, and it's just super good. There's not much I can complain about this album. This album is pretty comfortably like a top 25 all time for me. I just really love it. Love everything about it. I think it's totally unique. I wish they had more stuff like this. And it's just one of my absolute favorites. So Triangle, 5 out of 5.
Yeah. I'm not sure that same enthusiasm for it, but I'm just looking on Rate and Music. This is probably my number 5 of 67. So
yeah, it would probably be my 4th, just thinking about it.
I think my top 5 is probably, I think Pisces, Capricorn, and Jones wins the year, followed by Between the Buttons, Younger Than Yesterday, Something Else by the Kinks, and then Triangle. It's a loaded top 5 though.
Yeah, it's a very strong year, I think.
I don't have Sgt. Pepper's or Magical Mystery Tour in there, and that just sort of shows how great of a year it is.
That's crazy. Yeah, I don't really count Magical Mystery Tour, honestly. It feels like since it was released as an EP and then like later as an album with like singles, I don't know, it feels like kind of cheating. Like it's almost like a semi compilation.
I mean, the issue with that is, tell me right now that track listing isn't one of the best that the Beatles made.
It is in the same way that for most bands, like a greatest hits is probably their best track listing. I just don't know if it counts, I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
That probably leads into what I was going to say here. I feel like the best way to enjoy the Brummels probably is a greatest hits collection. Aside from Triangle, I think that the rest of their records, you can probably take their best 4 or 5 songs, put them into a mix CD, hit shuffle on that, and you're probably going to get the best blend of their sound and the best overall mentality of everything. I
agree, especially for their first 2 albums, and then also you can get like some of the non-album singles on the greatest hits, which will just add to it. So that's probably the best way to do it, I think.
Mhm. I think that box that I was talking about has a decent bit of outtakes and the singles and whatnot. So I might send you a link to that if you're interested.
Yeah, I'll check that out.
Well, alrighty. I already know what's going to happen next week. Aidan does too, and it's a bloodbath, people. Next week, we're going to be tackling one of my personal favorite bands, one of our guests' personal favorite bands, one of Aidan's least favorite bands. We're going to be doing the discography and the ranking of Cab For Cutie. Late 90s to 2000s, even current day, they have a new record coming out this year. Indie rock legends, led by Ben Gibbard, who is also the main orchestrator behind the Postal Service. Just an incredibly good discography, in my opinion. Aidan feels less happy about it, but I'll leave the suspense there.
Here's what I'll say. It's a bloodbath, I agree, but it's an exceptionally funny bloodbath. So
I too will prop up our episode. Alrighty, with that being said, I hope you all enjoy our discussion on the Beau Brummels. Maybe you'll actually listen to this band, because guaranteed like 3 have. And with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed the episode. You all have a great one. See you.